Welcome back, everyone. We hope that you had a quick moment at least to be able to get to stand up, get a little stretch, maybe get some nourishment. And so hopefully you are ready to rock and roll. We have a fantastic group of professionals that are joining us. And so let me introduce them, and then I'll have Stephen kick off the panel for all of you. And so again, certainly delighted to have this group. One of the things that I've been trying to do more is learn not just from autistic people, but also autistic professionals. And so really looking deep in, not deep, but looking for professionals who are autistic, whether that be in the counseling space, the therapy spaces, the physician spaces, and really getting a direct understanding from them about their experiences, as well as their experiences working with people on the spectrum. So I'm very excited about this panel, to be honest, because I'm really excited to learn from this group as well. And so as a reminder, all of the bios are available on our website. We'll also put those in the chat for you. Again, just a couple of housekeeping things. If you're looking for continuing education credit, all of that information will be in the chat. And so feel free to check there. We are honored and delighted that we're able to offer as much continuing education and CME credit as we are. We recognize and value your time and your effort for being here. And so certainly want to give back to you in the way of no cost continuing education credit. Our mission and our vision here at Echo Autism Communities is to try to get our best practices, autism best practices, out as far and as wide as we possibly can. So we do everything we can to make things as accessible for those who live in small communities, big communities all around the world, so that you all can have access to those autism best practices. So hopefully that's a benefit to many of you. Without further ado, though, I want to introduce our next panel. The panel, something that we started early in our very first go round of our Echo Autism Community Symposium, was this session or section of our time together called Listen to the Spectrum. Obviously, we value the autistic perspective as well as the lived experience perspectives of parents, caregivers, spouses, friends, employers, all of those different ways that people have lived experience related to autism. But listening to the spectrum is vital. It's essential to what we do. It's essential to how we grow together as a community. And so see the possibilities and all abilities that the autistic clinicians or some autistic clinicians share their insights. And so certainly I'm excited about this piece of our program today. So this presentation offers a unique opportunity to hear directly from autistic clinicians about their experiences and insights. By sharing their personal and professional journeys, these clinicians will highlight the diverse abilities and strengths within the autistic community. Attendees will also have a chance to gain a deeper understanding of autism, challenge common misconceptions, which I hope we are all doing throughout the day today, and learn practical strategies for fostering inclusivity and support. The session will emphasize the importance of seeing possibilities in all abilities and promoting self-advocacy. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Stephen to introduce the panel and get us started. So thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you, Kristen, for a great introduction, and it's such an honor to be here with Amber, Janet, and Joe as we Joy as we talk about what it's like on this side of the autism spectrum. So we're going to start out with an introduction. The first question is, tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey with autism. And we're going to start with Janet, Joy, and then Amber.
All right, good morning, everyone. Like Dr. Shore said, my name is Janet, and I am a licensed psychologist in Omaha, Nebraska. I was diagnosed with autism about 2 years ago, right before I turned 30. I realized I was autistic when I started my first job as a psychologist about 6 months before that. Everything was going really well. I was thrilled to start my new position. I felt comfortable in my relationships. I felt confident in my clinical skills. I felt secure in my finances. My world was feeling safe to me. So then with that, the real me started to show. And all of a sudden, I was spending a lot of my days stimming in excitement, jumping up and down, echoing my favorite TV shows, shout out to New Girl, and collaging for hours on end. It felt like joy and creative ideas were bursting out of me. I was letting go of my mask that kept me in line, and I was just happy and present without limits. Then there was a night where it felt like a constellation of experiences came together, and I had the realization that I was autistic, and it was just very obvious to me that it was true. Um, so at first I didn't seek out an evaluation because I wanted to spend time believing and trusting in my own understanding of autism as a clinician. I feared being potentially dismissed if I were to go to another provider and explain my experiences and what I felt was true. And I also wanted to sit with the belief that self-identification is valid. But after about 6 months, I realized that I wanted to get evaluated because I needed that external validation from another professional to feel secure. So I had an evaluation and was diagnosed. And after that, this brought up a whole lot of different feelings to the forefront. A lot of it was relief in knowing that I know myself well and I know like how I can be myself a little bit more authentically. But it also brought up a lot of grief, feeling like I was kind of trapped inside myself, and how much masking was a core component of how I presented to the world. The world expects people to be a certain way, and I obliged out of a lifetime of compliance and people pleasing. And even though it's been a couple years, I'm still learning about myself and how to find my way in life so that that joy and creativity and safety can be a central part of how I experience life every day. It still shocks me to this day that I studied autism as a school psychology doctoral student. I did coursework in autism. I worked with autistic people. It was really just so surprising that I have all this formal training, and I'm going to use quotes here, formal training, and a lot of it just points to how deficit-based and stereotypical the way we teach about autism in graduate coursework is, and how autism can look so different across the spectrum. Finding out you're autistic is a loaded experience. It can be a major relief, but it could also be a very emotional and life-changing experience. And it is my hope that more people can discover they're autistic because they're able to be their authentic selves, stimming and deeply engaging with their special interests and emotionally expressive unmasked. It is a real possibility that people can be happily autistic, despite the reality of the ways that autism can also be disabling. And I hope autistic people can get the support they need to lead affirming and aligned lives that are true to them.
Hey, Janet, thank you very much for your informative introduction. And as you say, learning that one is autistic, it's a double-edged sword. It's a loaded experience, as you said. It can be freeing and also can be challenging and scary at times as well. And you're a great example of how you're taking your diagnosis for greater self-awareness and then spreading that out to others as well. So thank you very much for your introduction. It's a pleasure to have you with us. And we're now going to move over to Joy.
Hi, I'm Joy. I'm a board certified behavior analyst now. So my diagnosis journey probably started when I was about 4 or 5. So because I'm 48, I've gone through the whole DSM. Every time it's updated, my diagnosis is updated. But I've been diagnosed since I was a child. I was non-vocal until I was 12. So I was in certificate track course in my education. So that meant that I did not get a high school diploma. So I was impacted by ableism all my life. I think that me personally, it's a little bit of ableism, a little bit of racism, because it's kind of intertwined because I'm a Black autistic person. So I was always put in a box and told that I was quote unquote lower functioning. They used to use the R word medically when I was younger. So that was like part of my medical record. When I was about 26, let me go back. When I was 19, I met my husband. He started kind of boosting like my self-esteem, telling me that I could do things, even though I thought that I couldn't, because teachers and clinicians my whole life had told me that, college isn't for you, you can't do these things. So eventually I got my GED when I was about 26 years old. And once I got that reinforcement of getting my GED, I realized that, I can do other things with proper accommodations. I do have comorbid intellectual disabilities, but when I'm properly accommodated, I can do everything everybody else does. So eventually I got my undergrad, then I got a master's in education, and I taught autistic children in Germany. I realized that I didn't want to be in education and got a degree in psychology. I went through ABA as a child, but it was before behavior analysts kind of really existed. It was more of like a thing that psychologists used to implement in the programs that I was in. So I knew what it was, but I didn't know what it was. I moved to Maryland, became an RBT, and started working for some institutions that implemented this. And I realized this is very familiar. This is what I went through as a child. However, now I began to have the language to identify what I felt was harmful and wrong with it and what was icky about it. I ended up going through about 14 different jobs as an RBT, very upset most of the time leaving them. So I decided to become a BCBA, became a BCBA, and now I write a lot of literature on neurodivergent affirming assent-based practices. I do own a clinic where I practice neurodivergent affirming assent-based practices. And that's kind of like my lane of what I do, because I don't want people to go through what I went through as a child. I also kind of accidentally specialize in intersectionality. So most of the time, the hospitals here will refer you to me if you also have like another marginalized identity, because I have that experience. I also have the experience, like I said, of being a Black autistic person. That I was adopted by doctors. So I believe the only reason I'm probably properly diagnosed, because my diagnosis was changed when I was adopted, is because I had like privilege by proxy. So there are a whole bunch of layers in terms of my identity and being autistic, and also being Black on top of that. But that's who I am.
All right, Joy, welcome to our panel, and thank you for your informative introduction. And we need more people like you and more people like Janet who have the lived experience, who can, as Joy, as you said, can identify and understand and take the ickiness, you might say, out of ABA. There was a lot of ickiness. There still is a lot of ickiness, but together we can work to make it better. And so thank you. And we are now on to Amber.
Hi, so my name is Amber. I'm a neurodivergent therapist, and my journey with autism, it's all over the place. So for most of my life, I felt like I missed a secret class called How to Human 101. Everyone else seemed to have the syllabus, and I was just over here trying to take pop quizzes with no notes and a broken pencil. So I was often told I was too sensitive, too much, or my personal favorite, too dramatic, which is ironic because I was always exhausted from how hard I was working to appear normal. I wasn't even doing anything that extra. I just noticed everything. So from the flickering of the lights to the buzzing that they made, that is nails on a chalkboard. And yes, they do buzz. People saying I'm fine with body language that screamed that I'm absolutely not fine. Please ask me. Meanwhile, I'm over here just trying to decode social cues like I'm solving a crime scene. The world was loud, bright, overwhelming. It still is. And I didn't understand why it felt like I was the only one being hit with the full volume button every single day. Then came the masking. Oh, yeah. So I was basically an undercover agent, learning social scripts like how to smile without feeling it, or how to laugh when you didn't even understand the joke. Fun fact, I was a Jungle Cruise skipper. I really didn't understand most of those jokes that I was even saying. Um, so I wasn't being fake. I just thought that this was what people did, and I so badly wanted to belong. But I've learned masking takes energy, the kind of energy that left me socially jet lagged for days. People thought like I was just moody or defiant or had like introverted days. And I was like, no, no, I'm just in a sensory recovery mode because someone wore cologne and touched my arm without warning. Um, and I used to beat myself up a lot for that, for not being able to start tasks, stick to routines, bounce back from changes in plans. I thought I was lazy, but spoiler alert, turns out I was just experiencing executive dysfunction and sensory meltdowns. Who knew? I certainly didn't. So things started to shift when I began learning about autism in adults, especially in women and gender diverse people. Suddenly, I wasn't reading a checklist. I felt like I was reading my autobiography. So, sensory sensitivities, check. Hyperempathy, check. Need for structure, check. Years of burnout, it all just clicked. So I decided to pursue a formal diagnosis earlier this year. I made it halfway through before I was like, you know what? I think we've seen enough here. Even the psychologist was like, yep, this tracks. And I was like, classic ADHD move. Start strong, get distracted halfway, finish spiritually. So instead of forcing myself through a system that felt like it needed me to adapt once again, I chose to begin my own journey of understanding, one with more space for self trust and fewer 35-page intake packets. So once I started to embrace the ADHD combo, so autism and ADHD, which I have the ADHD combined also, so trifecta. That whole chaos meeting structure lifestyle, everything started to make more sense. One part of me thrives in routine, while the other parts want to spontaneously alphabetize my spices at 2 a.m. and then forget that I even know how to cook. So I used to think that I had to choose, and now I'm just trying to manage both like a little weird internal sitcom in my mind. So I've recently gave myself permission to stim, to avoid eye contact, wear the same soft shirt on repeat, and the biggest one, to say no. So say no to social events, to phone calls, to pants with buttons. And I've honestly never been happier. I'm still unmasking, still learning, still occasionally Googling, is this an ADHD thing, an autism thing, or an Amber thing? But I found within that in itself, I've gotten a community, found a sense of peace, joy living life on my own terms, not on a neurotypical script that I never even auditioned for. So, yes, I have autism. I have ADHD. I'm proud. I'm no longer chasing an identity that fits someone else's mold. And I'm learning to be me, fully, fiercely, and unapologetically. And if nothing else, I've learned that so far, I was never broken. I was just running a different operating system. And honestly, I kind of like this one a lot better. So that's me.
All right, well, it's great to have you here, Amber, as you. And the story you tell is one of empowerment. Now that you know that you're autistic, you have ADHD, odd HD, you might say, and it's good. And instead of working against it and feel like you're trying to learn human 101, like all of us, as we learn about our characteristics, we transition from awareness, and this being Autism Awareness Month, transitioning to Autism Acceptance Month. And that is when we begin to work with our autistic characteristics. We work with them and we take it even up to the next level from awareness, acceptance, and moving to appreciation, appreciating us for who we are. And so what brings me here, I was diagnosed after, well, let's just say after 18 months of typical development, I got struck with the regressive autism bomb, like 30% of us. I lost functional communication, had meltdowns, withdrew from the environment. In a brief, was a very autistic little kid. There was so little known about autism then that it took my parents a whole year to find a place for diagnosis. And when they did, the doctor said, well, gee whiz, your kid's so sick, send him to an institution. Fortunately, my parents, like we see ever increasing numbers of parents around the world, they advocated on my behalf and they convinced the school to take me in about a year. And it was during that year they implemented what we would today refer to as an intensive home-based early intervention program. And I believe their breakthrough was when, after their attempts to get me to imitate them failed, and everybody's used imitation as a teaching strategy, either formally or informally, and most of the time it works, but perhaps due to a difference in mirror neurons for many of us autistic people, it didn't work for me. So they flipped it around and they imitated me. And once they did that, I became aware of them in my environment. And we developed a trusting relationship. And they were able to move me along to a point where speech began to return at age 4. And I think the key implication is that, one, you have to meet the autistic person where they are. And Joy, maybe you experienced that as a clinician, as a registered behavioral technician, anyone who works with autistic people, who counsels autistic people, like Janet was talking about. You have to meet the person where they are. Then you develop a trusting relationship. And then you can move on. And that works for autistic individuals, people who are otherwise neurodivergent, and I believe everybody else as well. And now we fast forward, and here I am in front of you. I am a professor of special education. I refer to myself as an autistic professor of special education at Adelphi University, focusing primarily on issues related to autism. And my research concentrates on using participatory research. In other words, involving the autism community, autistic people as equals, in research into mental health and supporting mental health for autistic individuals. So it's great to be here with all of you. And now that we've introduced ourselves, we move to question number 2, which is, in your field, what challenges or concerns do your clients face as autistic people? And this time the order goes Joy, Amber, and Janet. So we're starting with Joy.
I mean, my field has been a big source of harm and trauma for autistic people. People do not consider autistic people the consumer. A lot of times they default to the parent. I have a major problem with behavior analysts, the way they measure social validity. You go to school to become a behavior analyst, you take classes on verbal behavior. So just because somebody is not vocal does not mean that they don't have an opinion, does not mean that there's no way for you to assess their opinion and get to know them. So to me, that's not an excuse. So again, I, like yourself, do research on making sure that the consumer is who we listen to. But the biggest concern is, well, it's the trauma, it's the harm of being forced to be held to a standard that's not your own. I'm not neurotypical. So why would you assess me according to what neurotypical norms are? Why aren't there assessments that exist that measure what a healthy autistic or neurodivergent person is and try to get me to that baseline rather than the baseline of a neurotypical person, because I'm not that. So I'm never going to meet that. So what ends up happening is you end up just making more money off of me because you start causing problems that didn't exist. I had an intervention. If I don't make eye contact, it's because I'm overstimulated. So if I don't make it, the only thing you got to teach me how to do is to say, I don't make eye contact. I'm paying attention. If I respond to you, that means I'm paying attention. I don't have to look at you. So we are often puppeted. We are often made more vulnerable. There's a practice called pairing, which to me, I build therapeutic alliances with my clients. I don't pair. Pair is very, it's contrived. It reminds me of, I always tell people a predator at a park. They measure what you like and then use it to call what they say is participation, but it's really not. It's like coercion. So for us, it's realizing that we need what we say we need, but don't take ABA away. Don't throw it away with the bathwater. Like there are a lot of medical practices that have been problematic in the past. You don't just throw it away, you fix it. I have a problem with other autistic people who never needed behavioral therapy, saying like, just take it away. OT speech are not going to do what we do. We need behavioral therapy, but we need it how we need it. We don't need to be harmed in it. So I kind of feel like it's a real struggle for those of us that do need behavioral therapy, because people are always saying, hey, just don't get it. And that's not an option for all of us. So some people need to look past their privilege and realize just because you didn't need it doesn't mean that other people do. So how about you help them advocate to cultivate what they need and stop disseminating fear? So there's a lot of fear that's disseminated around the field too, rather than education. So it's my field is like a plethora of problems. So it's trauma, harm, miseducation, and just trying to fight for what you need and then getting the access that you need. Because all insurance companies are not created equal. And then if you live in different countries, sometimes you don't even have access to ABA from that national health care. You have to private pay. So it's a lot of different, things. So I guess that's it.
All right, Joy, thank you very much.
Mhm.
And applied behavior analysis is the only approach that autistic people report being traumatized by. And we need more people like you, like I mentioned before, who are working to make ABA, and by extension, all approaches, more autistic and neurodivergent friendly and affirming. Why do we measure autistic people against non-autistic benchmarks? Why do we expect eye contact when we know that that doesn't work for us? So in my world, you are now president of the International Applied Behavior Association governing body. Thank you very much. All right, we move on to Amber.
So one of the most common and painful challenges of autism that my clients and myself are impacted by almost every single time we talk is masking and camouflaging. So most of us have spent our entire lives performing these neurotypical behaviors just to survive. Scripting conversations. I did that today. Forcing eye contact, stifling stims, mimicking facial expressions or vocal tones. It becomes second nature to us, but it's not natural. It's a survival strategy. So what's heartbreaking to me is that by the time my clients land in therapy with me, many don't even know who they are underneath the mask. So we've been praised for how high functioning we appear or our accomplishments, but inside we're burnt out, disassociated, and deeply lonely. So a lot of neurodivergent clients express to me that they feel permanently misunderstood, even by the people who care about them and are in their support system. They've been told we're too sensitive, too rigid, too literal. Some of us have been accused of lacking empathy and emotions when really we're overwhelmed by too much empathy, and we feel others' emotions so deeply that it just shuts us down. I've had clients say that they're constantly walking on eggshells. afraid there'll be too much or not enough in every interaction they have. And that chronic fear of rejection is heavy, especially when paired with a lifetime of being misunderstood at home, school, workplace, everywhere. So, in addition to masking, social relationships are another minefield. Many of us neurodivergents, we crave connection. We want deep, authentic relationships, but we struggle with the small talk, the lack of transparency, the social norms that rely on all of these unspoken rules, or myself specifically, knowing when to send a text and when to make that phone call. My clients might say something along the lines like, I want to be close to people, but I don't know how to keep friends long term. Or I always still feel like an outsider, even when I'm included. There's grief at the bottom there, and grief for the relationships we've lost, and fear that future connections might require too much masking to maintain, which, when we mask so much, even in our social situations, we're going to experience sensory overload too. So that's a huge one that is often invisible to others. Neurodivergence describe being overwhelmed by background noise, textures, lighting, smells, hum of a fan or electronic, things most people don't even notice. We're often internalized, and we often internalize this as like being too sensitive, when in reality our nervous system is just operating on high alert 24/7. I hear and even feel how exhausted by environments we get and the hostility to our bodies, but when we ask for accommodations, we're often labeled as difficult or dramatic. And then my all-time favorite one that I hear all the time is that executive dysfunction, which is completely misunderstood. My clients will say, I know what I need to do and I want to do it, but I just can't. And we've heard our entire lives from parents, teachers, employers that we're just lazy or unmotivated, irresponsible. But it's not about motivation. It's about our brains not being able to initiate, prioritize, or switch between tasks. And that gap between intention and action usually creates immense shame, especially when paired with the social pressure to be productive at all costs and at all times, kind of setting us up for failure. Which, even my clients who come to me after years of trying different things, many share stories about the negative experiences with mental health providers and physical health providers, therapists who didn't recognize their autism or who labeled their traits instead of affirming them. Some misdiagnosed early or entirely, including myself. Others told that their special interests were obsessions, or that their lack of communication style was avoidant. For some, before getting a neuro-affirming therapist, therapy just became another place where they had to mask and they stopped going. So in all of this, I kind of want to voice also about what Joy just focused on. Intersectionality matters here too. When you're autistic and a person of color in the LGBTQIA plus community, disabled, or another part of a marginalized community, the risks of being misdiagnosed, misunderstood, or even harmed increases. Many clients have their autistic traits dismissed as trauma responses or cultural differences, when in reality, our experiences are layered. It's not either or. We're just carrying not just neurodivergence, but the weight of a navigating system that wasn't built for any part of who we are at our core. So ultimately, the question that sits beneath almost every session I have with my clients who identify as neurodivergent, so autistic, ADHD, odd ADHD, they're questioning, is it safe to just be myself? And instead of, oh, can I cope? they're asking, can I exist in a world without having to hide or shrink or belittle myself or explain myself constantly? And that's where therapy becomes sacred in my mind. I strive to create a space where clients can drop the mask, be mirrored with compassion, and begin to rewire the belief that being ourselves is a risk. And that's when I actually see healing begin, not just for my clients, but even as a reminder to myself. So for me, supporting my neurodivergent clients, it's not about fixing them. It's about holding space for the grief, the exhaustion, the brilliance, their creativity, the sensitivity, and gently helping relearn that who they are has always been enough.
All right, thank you, Amber. A fire hose of misconceptions you've given us. Masking is such a challenge because we have to engage in so much of it. One thing that I think is important to keep in mind is that masking is not inherently bad, but what is bad is feeling that you don't have a choice of whether to mask. And perhaps even worse than that is not knowing that you're masking. And as you described, people don't even know who they are because they get so embedded in their masks. We all mask all the time. We're all masking right now as we talk to you to some extent. And we should be empowered to make the considered decision to engage in this activity. Is it worth it to mask? How much masking am I going to have to do? I think of masking as being a range from 0, which is completely none, to 100%, which is exhausting. And so many times you can get by with 10% masking or 25% masking. And it's not so exhausting. And we should be empowered to make decisions about our masking. Your comments about empathy, they're right on. So many autistic people I know, it's not a lack of empathy, but it's too much, almost a fusing with the other person and maybe having difficulty differentiating between our own emotions and the other person's, getting overwhelmed and then shutting down, or perhaps expressing the emotion, empathy in a way that is not a neurotypical standard. So it just gets missed. So many challenges we face, many misconceptions. And it's great that we have a panel here who are working hard as we go about our lives supporting autistic individuals to better understand ourselves and to remove these misconceptions. All right, we are on to Janet.
So I think a big struggle that my autistic clients face is just the ongoingness of the struggle to live in a very neurotypical facing world. And it starts early. I think it starts with these young kids that are coming into my office who just started preschool or kindergarten and struggle to cope with the demands that are placed on them. I have kids that come in who, just like Amber and Joy said, like mask all day, and then they end up having these explosive meltdowns at home because they're just keeping it together while they are at school. And it kind of sets up their structure of their school career to be masking while they are in the public eye and then just like holding it together until they get home and fall apart. And a struggle that I have as a clinician is I want them to be able to like drop the mask as much as possible while they're at school and be able to stim or speak freely. But there's only so much of that they can do within the constraints of the school environment that they're in. And some school environments are more flexible and allow more of that authentic self-expression, which is wonderful. But then there are environments where it just is not safe for kids to do that. So then how do we help them cope with the painful realities of the school that they're in, or just the wider cultural structure that we find ourselves in. And a lot of the issues that autistic kids deal with that are like stereotypically autistic, I feel like align a lot with a stress response. So things like picky eating, things like behavioral rigidity, I believe align with someone who is under a lot of stress, who needs things to be a certain way in order to feel like they can cope. So when I'm working with clients, I'm trying to dig through what is the root cause and how can we address the root cause and make the environment more supportive of this child rather than having the child cope or tolerate with things endlessly. Because over time, that's going to cause a lot of problems. It's going to cause issues with identity. It's going to cause issues with their physical body. And we want, like, if we're really working in mental health and truly supporting mental health, we have to support this person as they are.
All right, Janet, thank you very much. And it is an ongoing struggle, as you started a few moments earlier, to understand this non-autistic world. I've come across many parents and even autistic people themselves who recognize that they're on their perfect behavior in school. It could also be extended to work or community or outside. And then when they get to a safe place, which is usually home, it could be with parents or it could be with a spouse or a significant other or roommates as an adult. And those explosions occur because that's the only safe place to explode and to let off that steam. And often I'll hear teachers and parents saying, are we talking about the same kid? In an educational type of situations. Part of our rigidity speaks directly to your comment about stress response. The world, especially the social world, is so relatively unpredictable than it is compared to the non-autistic population, that the rigidity can be a desperate attempt to keep, to maintain some sort of predictability in our environment. As for me, my clients take the form as music students. I give music lessons to autistic individuals, and often I'm a place of last resort. The student has gone through many teachers who don't understand the individual, haven't figured out a way to connect with, making that initial connection and developing a trusting relationship with the student. So as I mentioned earlier, it's so important to start where the person is, in this case, musically. And often we'll start doing projects that have seemingly nothing to do with music, but in actuality, we're creating materials that will then be later on used to, for example, to learn notation. And now that we've worked together in collaboration to create these materials are now more meaningful to the individual. And just like the non-autistic population, I have the full spectrum of musical abilities, and my students, some of them could be professional musicians, should they so choose. Others work harder at music, however, they still enjoy it. And some I'm still working out on learning how to better reach these individuals. All right, we're moving on, and we are now on to question number 3. What misconceptions do you feel people have about autism? And we'll start with Amber before moving on to Janet and then on to Joy.
So I know I already covered some of these, but there are still so many misconceptions about autism, and they impact everything. So from access to support in healthcare, to media representation, to how we are treated in every single day life. One of the most damaging myths is the idea that autism can only look one way. So usually that one way is portrayed as a younger white nonverbal boy who's either a math genius, think Sheldon Cooper, or visibly struggling to function. And that stereotype is incredibly narrow, and it erases the diversity that actually exists within our community. So it leaves out the women, non-binary folks, people of color, and especially those of us with more internalized or less visible traits. So autism is a spectrum. It's not a straight line. It's not a scale from not autistic to very autistic. It's a deeply nuanced intersecting experience that shows up differently depending on who we are and what we've lived through. So it doesn't just intersect with our behavior, it intersects with race, gender, class, trauma history, personality, culture, and so much more. So when we see autism, it might look like stimming and meltdowns in one person, and a complete emotional shutdown and perfectionism in another. Some of us stim visibly. You'll see me play with a lot of toys while we're talking. Some of us mask so thoroughly that we don't even realize we're doing it. Some are social and chatty. Others are quiet and internal and introvert. Some of us need more support. Some of us need less. Usually until we hit burnout. But none of these traits make someone more or less autistic. They're all just different expressions of our neurotype. Another common and incredibly harmful misconception is, again, that we lack empathy or even emotional depth. So in my personal and my professional life, I've found the opposite to be true time and time again. So many of us feel everything so deeply, or we just do not have the feeling word that associates best with what we are feeling. Sometimes we're feeling so much that it just overwhelms our system. So it's not a lack of emotion, it's instead a flood of it. And the problem isn't that we don't care, it's that the way we process and express that care doesn't always look neurotypical. So what is deemed as fake, it's not. And our version shouldn't make it any less real. I've watched other autistic people break down over a sad video or a friend's pain and then wonder if they reacted wrong because they didn't cry when they were supposed to. I've personally cried over a tree being cut down, but not at my own grandfather's funeral. And the depth of the emotion is always there. It's just, again, nuanced, and it deserves to be honored however we can present it. There's also this harmful belief that we can grow out of autism or overcome it with the right therapy or enough effort, and that's not how it works. Autism isn't a phase. It's not a behavioral problem. It's a lifelong neurotype. And what people are often seeing when we seem more functional isn't a cure. It's the impact of years of masking, of memorizing social scripts, or suppressing who we are to fit in, and that suppression has a cost for us. It has anxiety, depression, burnout, confusion, deep grief, not to even mention the physical health ones. And I've seen so many of us break down, not because we're getting worse, but we finally stopped hiding. And now we're trying to remember who we are beneath all of it. Another harmful myth that kind of links to it is that we need to be fixed. There's still so much language around early treatment, intervention, or even curing autism, but we don't need to be cured. We need to be understood and accepted. The goal should never be to make us less autistic. It should be to support us in living full, meaningful lives as we are. That means respecting our sensory needs, honoring our communication preferences, making space for us to be allowed to stim without judgment, and recognizing that self-regulation is going to vary person to person. Lastly, there's this idea, especially in professional and academic spaces, that we cannot succeed or thrive, that we can't be leaders, and that's simply not true. We do thrive, especially when we're in environments that honor our needs with community, accommodations, freedom to be ourselves. We are therapists, educators, scientists, parents, teachers, leaders, creative artists, and so much more. And our success shouldn't require hiding who we actually are. So the truth is, the biggest shift doesn't need to happen within us. It needs to happen in the world around us. We don't need to change. We need people to stop trying to fit us into these boxes that we were never meant to fit into.
All right, thank you very much. Many myths that you're addressing. It's great that you're doing that. The autism looks one way myth, which leads to, which is a common note of criticism to whatever autism you see in the media. Not everybody is Rain Man. Not everybody is whatever, Sheldon, or whoever it may be. But there's such amazing diversity that we find within the autism spectrum. It may even be greater than the diversity we find outside of the autism spectrum. And also dealing with the deficit model. And the way I look at that is that if we use the deficit model, the best we can get to is a poor imitation of a non-autistic person. Or we can turn towards an abilities-based or strength-based models and ask, what can the autistic person do? And help that individual be the best autistic individual they can be. So thank you, Amber. And we now move on to Janet.
Okay. So one of the biggest misconceptions that I feel like there is around autism is just how we define it to begin with. And I know when the mental health field, we have some level of obligation to follow the DSM and understand how people meet criteria and be based in that. But the DSM is incredibly deficit based, and the way it's written just defines autism by a lack of social engagement or like a deficit in social emotional reciprocity in relationships, and a need for restricted and repetitive behaviors and interests. And it just is defined in a way that reminds me more of an autistic person under distress and masking, and shutting down and have like responding to the neurotypical world that we live in compared to what I think is actually happening internally. So when I think of autism, I think more of someone who processes sensory information, emotional processing, and to a certain extent, cognitive processing differently than a typical person. And that most people, if we think of a normal bell curve, fall within the average range. But for autistic people, we are highly sensitive, highly emotionally sensitive, or on the other side, like that might be more challenging for us. And it is this difference within us that is autism, not necessarily the challenge itself in navigating a neurotypical world. And when we think about autism that way, I feel like we're able to empathize more with the struggle instead of blaming the person for the problems that they are experiencing. Yes. And I also think the definition of autism as it's written in the DSM causes autistic people to feel like they themselves are wrong when it's not them that's wrong. It's the context in which they exist that needs to match what they need and who they are so that they can thrive. Another misconception that I struggle with when I'm interacting with people, especially as like someone who on the surface is a successful person who people can make assumptions that I've overcome autism when that's very much not true. Just the idea that autism is a superpower or can be. I feel like this misconception puts pressure on autistic people to be exceptional in order to be worthwhile, and that's not the case. Autistic people can be ordinary and in fact have every right to be very ordinary, just like everyone else. And the thing I want to end in is just saying that autistic people can simultaneously be extraordinary in the way that they process information and how sensitive they can be. They can be disabled by that and the way the world is set up, and they can be ordinary in what they want in life. All three of these things can be true.
All right, Janet, thank you for some very important wisdom. We've got to get away from the definition of autism being deficits, as you said, in social interaction, restricted motions, repetitive interests, and so on. And we can still use ASD. Why don't we just call it autism spectrum difference? And that opens us up to exploring these differences in a more positive way. That widely varying skill set idea that you came up with at the end, that is so important. It's so confusing to many people who support us, people who know us, and confusing to us autistic individuals as well. So, for example, at age 4, I was found by my parents taking apart a watch with a knife. I'd pop open the back, extract the motor, remove the gears, spin them around, and put it all back together again, and the watch still worked, and there weren't any pieces left over. So amazing fine motor control to take apart a watch. And I'm always curious as to where that fine motor control went when it came to penmanship in grade school. Because like so many of us autistic people, I was a penmanship disaster area. And you can go to your favorite occupational therapist for some interesting neurological explanations for this. And what this is also an example of is often the sharp lines of demarcation between the abilities that autism gives us, whether it's a superpower, whether it's just a regular person with a regular strength or ability, to very significant challenges that come with being autistic, the disabilities. And with those disabilities, we also have to ask, are they true disabilities? Or is it something that society has decided to value in a different way that makes it a disability? Does not being able to write neatly constitute a disability? Especially when we find can find different ways to get our words out on paper or in the computer. All right, we have Joy. Let's hear what Joy has to say.
Okay, I think everybody kind of covered all the stereotypes, and I think it's very nuanced. I think everybody has different experiences. I think to even say the things that we've said is still putting misconceptions and stereotypes. Everybody's experiences are broadly different. Everybody can have really different experiences. I do agree with not to always view it as deficit based. I do, especially like in my own treatment plans, maladaptive behavior is very subjective when you're comparing it to different norms, different culture. I think you have to take all of that into consideration when considering the human being. I do want to bring up, not everybody can mask. I was not a child that could mask. My clients can't mask. So I don't want everybody to think that autistic people are always walking around masking, because we all can't do that. And the people that can't are the people like myself that were viewed and not given the chance. I couldn't even be viewed as lazy because nobody gave me a chance to do anything. So I want to get the chance to be called lazy, give me the opportunity to do something, but also accommodations and lowering expectations are two different things. And largely the population that I grew up with, we don't want to be accommodated in the sense where you lessen the task, but I want you to give me what I need so I can complete the same task as you. But I don't want you to excuse me from the task because you think I'm autistic. This was my experience. And I guess part of the misconception is I have a very different experiences from the people on the panel. And I feel like I want people to realize not everybody can mask. Not everybody is walking around, like with hidden autism. When you are autistic and people see you as autistic, it's also a different experience because you're viewed as nothing really. You're not really given a chance to do anything. And that is and there are people in between. I don't know what they experience. There's so many different experiences and so many different, types. And I kind of want people to kind of lean off of what I look at now is I see a lot of social media and it looks like people read the script of what the DSM is and act it out sometimes. And that's very disturbing to me. I grew up all my life in self-contained classes. So all of my friends are autistic. My husband's autistic. My daughter's autistic. I have autistic grandchildren. So like my whole family is autistic and a lot of it looks like performative. So I want the clinicians to lean into the community rather than just rely strictly on social media. Because for me, and this is just my personal opinion as an autistic person, I can't relate to what I'm saying because this was not my experience. Even being on social media is very difficult for an autistic person who has a lot of social challenges and difficulties being able to keep up with the way that social media moves and understands it. So I just want people to get out there and really get to know the community, their non-vocal clients, their clients that are considered higher support needs, and really develop relationship with them. If you have an autistic, like an organization that's surrounding anything that's doing with autistic people and you don't hire any autistic people, you don't have any consultants or anybody on your staff that is a representative of that population, there's a problem. I always tell people if I walked into an NAACP meeting and there were no Black people there, I would be like, what is going on? So I want people to do a self-review and self-audit. And if you have an organization and you making money off of our population, realize you need to hire our population. And you need to make us a part of that because we deserve not just the voices of the consumer, but we need to be a part of the governing bodies. So that's my take on it.
All right, Joy, thank you so much for your take. And your participation is a beautiful example of the diversity that we so often need to be reminded of, that we find in the autistic community. And your ending point that if you're doing something that relates to the autism community, whether it's research, whether it's employment, whatever it might be, you really need to involve the autistic community, which brings us to the often repeated meme, nothing about us without us. And I see that Kristen has reappeared.
I am.
Q&A time.
It is Q&A time. And I just have to say that I learned exactly what I would, in other words, that was amazing. All three of you, and then Stephen as the moderator, just remarkable vulnerability. Thank you very much for being open and sharing your experiences. And certainly, Joy, I think the comments that you just ended with are so critical because, and honestly, I know you guys know this. I don't know the three of you personally very well, if at all. And so, I wasn't sure exactly what perspectives you would be bringing. And that's exactly what I wanted. Because I want our audience, I want the people that are part of our autism community, and then obviously people who are trying to be more supportive and inclusive of the autistic community and within the autistic community. It is huge, right? Like there are so many people and so many experiences that all of the misconceptions that you all highlighted are valuable and are true. And yet I think we could have another couple hours of conversation about exactly what we just hit on, right? And there are just so many things. I do want to get to a couple of questions, although admittedly, there are some amazing questions that people have chatted in, and I know I won't be able to get to all of them. So I'm going to pick two, and we'll do my best to get to those two before we have to move on. So I want specifically for Joy to help us understand, and Joy, I'm asking specifically you because of your BCBA background. There are several questions about kind of this idea around, and I'm merging some of the questions. So the ickiness around ABA, but then more importantly, not that, because I don't want to spend a ton of time, unless you'd like to, talking about the ickiness. It's more about how do we as both, again, I'm a physician, so I'm a physician who's trying to support people on the spectrum to access what they need. How do I guide families? How do I guide autistic people to the services that they need? And so second part to that question. Many times, and many of the folks that are on listening today will either be working with little kids or are parents of little kids, things like that. And I want them to have a eyes wide open approach to helping their loved one who is autistic, and not necessarily taking the headlines that they hear that may not be 100% true. So I know that was kind of a wordy way of getting to a question, but Joy, I'd love to hear your thoughts about how you would support people in navigating to services that are right for them.
Wait.
You're fine.
My bad. You just have to educate yourself and make sure that the clinician aligns with autistic values, like the community values. There are a lot of red flags. If a clinician is trying to teach a young child how to play, you can't teach me how to play. That's literally stealing my childhood and my joy. If they're not doing anything that's truly maladaptive, and when I say maladaptive, I mean like harmful to themselves or others. If you want to rip paper, rip paper. That's my leisure. You can't tell me what I do for fun. If I want to rip paper, as long as I clean it up afterwards, let me rip paper. If, so like those kind of things, trying to force people to pretend to be neurotypical is, when you become older, I realized I didn't know who I was because I was taught to not do certain things in front of people. But then people really didn't know who I was either. So when my friends really my friends, luckily I grew up around other autistic people. So they were like not judgmental, but like in terms of like my neurotypical friends, I like to watch movie credits. If you telling me that I need to watch a movie to make friends, you're not really my friend. If you can't appreciate that, you might think I'm weird. So I'm gonna tell you what my adult friends do now. They call me when the credits are about to come on. I watch the credits and then I go to dinner with them and they tell me about the movie. But I don't like watching movies. So why do I need to watch movies to make friends? Why are you teaching me to do what other people want to socialize with them? That's not helpful. I'd rather have 2 good friends than 10 friends that I'm sitting there like, this movie is good. I love it. So if that's the goal, if the goal is not functional communication, but also speech, just because an autistic person is vocal doesn't always mean that's the best mode of communication for them. I was not vocal until I was 12 because I have a lot of problems with like matching my I always say it's like my Bluetooth doesn't match. So it's exhausting. I learned how to do it because I had to, but was it the best? I don't know. I think maybe if they would have thought about what was best for me, I would be a lot more, I wouldn't have the comorbid mental things that I have going on. Like I'm always stressed. So you want to look at what's best for your kid and truly discriminate maladaptive from what your expectation is. Like Stephen said, differences are differences. Why are we treating differences? Why are we treating culture? I always give people the greatest example that everybody does. People talk about code switching. I totally can change my voice to sound what I was taught to be professional. I don't sound like that. I'm Black and I'm from the South Side of Chicago. I'm still a scholar with this voice. Why can't I model to other people that you can sound like this and be like this? People don't see that. So I teach grad school now, and people are like real surprised because they never see somebody that talks naturally. Why can't I be authentic? Why is authentic bad? So you have to really dig deep and think about, is this just being authentic? Is this just being who they are? Because it's exhausting for me to pretend to talk like that, and I don't really talk like that. Cite me in APA format with this accent. Like I always tell people, like, so it's the same thing. Everybody essentially does it. But with autistic people, it's like people go out of their way to program it, but everybody can relate in some manner of the way that they feel like they have to change in order to adapt to other people. And it's just not healthy because every person, every menopausal person who is in this room, who is me, will tell you that it comes a time when you can't even do it anymore. Like being in the state that I am now, and they don't study autistic women who go through menopause, so I don't even know what's happening, but I don't even have the ability to do that anymore. Like I can't physically, so and I couldn't do it when I was a child, which may mimic what I went through from puberty, but yeah, you just think about the things that you do that you like, why am I doing that? And wish for your clients what you wish for yourself, because everybody older has done something to appease other people and they realize I ain't really have to do that. Why did I do that? So that's what you look for. Look for genuineness. Look for people who care. Look for people who walk in your house and you can talk to them and you feel comfortable. I'm not for everybody and everybody is not for me. If you want certain things, I will tell you, if you want your kid to present a certain way, that's not me. But that's fine. Like look for who is your person and who your kid is attracted to.
I love it. Thank you so much for that. And just as a side note, there actually are some people looking at menopause in autistic women. I happen to be a part of that team. I'm not like leading that effort, but boy, I tell you, it's a fascinating space because don't forget, and I'm known for kind of thinking about this, but it's like autistic people grow up, right? Like the little tiny kids turn into grown-ups and get older, and they also navigate all of the different parts of life. And so Joy, amazing comments. All right, last question, and I know we're a couple minutes over, but I'm going to take that moderator latitude and do one more question and have Janet and Amber kind of help us with this one. So a couple of the questions were related to masking and particularly related to essentially how do we support younger, like 8 to 12-year-olds who may be being taught to mask in their schools because they'll get in trouble if they don't. Now, to be clear, I think we all agree that no one's out there saying, put on a mask, right? But this idea of behavior being, when I think about masking, I think about it, I mean, there's lots of ways to think about it. One way I think about it is, your behavior is unacceptable. You need to change your behavior to match what is expected. And to be clear, sometimes that's a necessary evil of the environment that you may be in. I'm not talking about autistic necessary evil. I'm saying in general, right? Like, to be honest, my natural state is not welcomed in most boardrooms. And yet, so like if I'm going to a boardroom, I have to do some behavior modifications, if you will. And yet I am curious what you guys would say, again, to kind of that middle childhood to maybe middle adolescent parents and or kid, because there are lots of kids who are really interested in this right now too. So how would you talk about masking with them, or how would you think about supporting them in some of these moments? And let's start with Janet, and then we'll end with Amber.
Yeah, I see so many of my like middle childhood autistic kids like having special interests that might be considered younger than what like they are supposedly supposed to grow out of. So helping them continue to really love the things that they love. Yeah, I think of kids who are obsessed with Elmo and are 8, 9, 10 years old, getting to the point where in a like neurotypical world, they might not be welcomed to like those things. It might be seen as like baby, but really encouraging them to like what they like, and also to get excited, like to be in environments where they can be jumping up and down in excitement over something. And like, I think delaying as much as possible the use of social media and the use of like the idea that they need to be portraying a certain way, like just being able to be in their body and be natural in what they do, is what I hope to help kids at that age try to do to stay their authentic selves.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Amber, what would you add?
So I actually work multiple jobs in multiple areas of this, and one of the jobs I do work with is kids around 6 to 13 who are usually neurodivergent and misunderstood. So I do a lot of the parent training on it of, hey, your kid is probably masking or suppressing something throughout the day. So home should be that safe space for them. Even if parents are like, okay, but they need to behave. We're not saying that they're not behaving. It just looks differently. So I try to encourage parents to kind of find loopholes or even ask the kids why they're not behaving a certain way. Like actually sit down, have a conversation without judgment. I know growing up, I couldn't like put my laundry down the chute in my room, and I never understood why. Like I would just have piles of dirty laundry, and I'm pretty sure it drove my parents up a wall. But I didn't realize until living on my own, one of the reasons I do that is so that I don't wear the same outfit every single day. Kids are mean. Kids are brutal. If I went to school with the same outfit every single day, no thank you. So I think sometimes there is a reason, even if the children do not know and fully understand why certain behaviors are coming up, and helping parents to understand we don't have to completely make them change to fit into, again, society's mold. Maybe we can accommodate and just twist the narrative a little bit so that it's easier for people like all of us on this panel to still be at least a little bit more authentic with ourselves and be able to do whatever is being asked of us. It's not always going to happen, and that's also what I preach to my parents. I'm like, listen, we can't do everything, but there has to be some give and take, especially so that kids don't grow up learning that they're not allowed to be themselves, because then they're just going to sit in therapy with me 10 years down the line and be like, let's unmask everything and change every perspective you've had about childhood to now. And that's not a fun conversation, especially if we can at least accommodate a little bit now. So I hope that answered the question.
Yes, you sure did. And again, I just want to take the opportunity to share all the love that's coming in to you guys from the questions and answers. It's just been a tremendous honor. I've learned so much from the four of you, and so thank you. I truly mean that I could spend many, many more hours listening to you, talking to you, getting your insights, and so we'll have to definitely find an opportunity to do that again. So with that, thank you so much for your time, and I'm gonna scooch us over to hearing from our next speaker. But again, thank you guys so much for your time and of course for your vulnerability and your authenticity. Much, much appreciated.